pitch. Eli Manning stays on his feet. It is caught by Tyree.
All right, here with brand new friend for another episode of Catch the Moment, Sledge Smith, founding director of Sledge Machine. Clearly has one of the greatest names ever, which we will certainly talk about. Sledge, how you doing, man? Welcome to Catch the Moment.
This is so phenomenal to be here with you. It's such an honor, David. Thank you for having me.
This is a pure joy. I mean, we've probably had a full episode just chatting up on a little dinner, little fellowship, little pregame.
You know, the first time we spoke on the phone, that felt like it was our first moment together that set this up, and I'm just so excited to be talking to you like this.
Listen, it's fantastic. So we definitely got to talk about Jason. We got to talk about your name. We got to talk about Sledge Machine. We got a lot to talk about, but just by way of tradition, we always like to ask our guests, where were you and what do you remember the first time you ever saw the helmet catch? What were your thoughts?
So obviously that was Super Bowl.
No doubt, 2008.
I was at a party, and the interesting thing about that was I had a drink in my hand.
Okay.
Right? But I didn't have like a can. I had a glass.
All right.
Right? Ice in it and it was ginger ale.
You was a soft drink.
When you made that catch, well, in between drinks, I had a ginger ale, right? You made that catch, and I was the one person in the room who didn't, like, scream. But I didn't realize that I jumped up, right? And I was holding the glass.
Yeah.
So, again, there's an open glass with ice in it, and it's filled to the brim with ginger ale. Flew all over the place, man. Flew all over me, flew all over the person in front of me.
Yeah.
It was like you would have thought that I would have caused a ruckus because of that, but everybody was so caught up in the fact that you caught the ball that way because it seems so surreal.
Yeah.
It seemed like for some reason, you know, the refs might get in the way and the zebras might say, nah, it wasn't a real catch or something like that. But the fact that you caught it in the manner that you did when people really weren't sure.
Yeah.
The way I responded to the fact that it looked like it looked was what I did. I threw my drink all over the place.
So no sound, just jump.
Yeah. And I got it. And then that's when I realized I hit the person in the back with the drink, and I felt so bad. And she didn't even care.
No, didn't even care. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
That is fantastic.
It was full of Giant fans. You know, it was the first time I really knew your name and never forgot it. You know, it's one of those moments where, you know, it's so aptly named your podcast because a moment represents that point in time that's not just present,
sure,
but that you don't forget. And there are certain things you don't forget. I'm sure, like, you don't forget you know, the birth of your children, you know, where you met Layla, your wife.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I remember where I was when, you know, Magic Johnson made his big announcement, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
that was one of those moments. So it's great that you listen to your podcast. You always ask people that because they always know, don't they?
You know, like, those are the stories I really do enjoy the most is like there's a story that typically goes along with it. Usually everybody kind of remembers the event, but it's just little neat things, man. I've had so many profound ones on the back end, but that's pretty good. I think you got to paint the picture a little bit because you're a New York City native. So number one, that's always cool because you being here your whole life, you know, we talked about this a little bit. I remember the Grandmaster Flash message, and New York City has made a drastic evolution in every borough.
Sure has.
So what was New York City like at that moment? So it's like, okay, the party's lit. Everybody's going crazy with the Giants winning. But we were in Arizona. So in my brain, I'm like, man, I wonder what it's like right now in Manhattan and people on the street.
It was insane because, you know, you were playing an opposition known as the Darth Vader of the league.
Right? Okay.
And there was gathered vitriol to dethrone them for what they were known for.
No doubt.
Which wasn't supposed to happen. right?
No, not at all.
It wasn't supposed to happen.
Not at all.
But that's exactly what did. So the way that people galvanized as New Yorkers around that, for one of the great brands of the NFL, for it to happen too.
Sure.
The way that it happened because of that catch as part of it was just remarkable.
Yeah.
You know, so it was, I mean, it's funny because it reminds me of, you know, we had this election to dethrone another certain Darth Vader that happened to be, you know, in the presidency. But we didn't know for a long period of time who the winner was.
True.
And I remember, speaking of catch the moment,
go for it.
I was on the phone in my crib, and there was this roaring of cheers that you could hear going on outside. And I realized, without even having to check the television, that the election had been called for Biden, right? Yeah. Finally.
Yeah, the decision.
That's a lot of what it was like. When people are high-fiving and the game had been won in the manner that it did. And it was, quite frankly, so exciting. You can always hear cheers at a Super Bowl party.
Yeah, no doubt.
Through the walls.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Or walking past a certain establishment.
Amazing.
But because it was the Giants, you know what I mean?
17-year drought.
Having a win like that.
Against New England.
All kinds of stories.
Yeah, it was a lot of stories in one package. But no, thanks for sharing that, because it's like we're in Arizona, of course, enjoying the moment. And, this is all that matters. This is the greatest city in the planet, in relation to the epicenter of so much. So finally bring one home. It was great to be a part of it. Let's get back into you. So I want to get into some of the journey. So let's start with the name and some of the background. You're born in Harlem. How do you get this uncommon name, Sledge? I don't think I've ever met another Sledge, and it's a fantastic name. And names go a long way. So I'm sure it served you well throughout your life. So how does that, what's the story behind your name?
Well, it really has, and, you mentioned, the name Sledge. I've got one of the world's most unique first names, or one of the world's most common last names.
Smith is.
So people, tap into that, number one. Number two, my full name, I don't think I've ever said it on a live production before.
No shame here. Give it to us.
But my full name is Sledge Hamilton Smith III. I'm actually third generation. And the name is based on a family legend. My father's side of the family is from San Antonio, Texas.
Okay.
And as the story was relayed and handed down to me, my great-grandfather, paternal grandfather's name was Calvin.
Okay.
Family grew up in tremendous poverty. And Calvin, at a very young age, I think, in adolescence, but told around 11 or 12,
sure,
maybe 13, needed to get a job. It just so happened that the wealthiest employer in that vicinity of San Antonio happened to be a rancher whose last name was Sledge. All right? So what happened is, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Wall Street.
Michael Douglas?
Starring Michael Douglas, exactly. And
it's a classic.
That movie is in part about this very prominent financier who takes someone under his wing, who's played by Charlie Sheen, a character named Bud Fox, right? And early on in the movie, it covers how persistent Bud Fox is to want to meet this character called Gordon Gekko that Michael Douglas played.
Got it.
And it talks about when he finally pulls that off, the Gordon Gekko character says, you see this guy? He spent 57 straight days trying to reach me because he wants to be a player, right? As I understand it, my great-grandfather, Calvin, did the same thing. He went every single day to this guy's ranch to ask for a job. And he got turned away any number of times.
Sure.
So one day he goes there, and unbeknownst to him, this rancher is hearing about this persistence where, they can almost set by a clock that he's going to arrive there to ask for a job. So one day when he does this, rancher comes out.
Sure.
Right? And he checks out my great-grandfather and asks him how old he is. Now, as it's a legend, it's a family legend. So
I like it.
As it's relayed to me, my great-grandfather realized this is my last chance. You know what I mean? If I can't convince the man himself who I'm finally standing in front of how old I am and old enough to get a job, it's over, right? So he lies. I think he said that he was 16 and he was like 12 or 13.
Got you.
And that could go only one of two ways.
Sure.
You're turned away because you're lying and they know you're lying. Or what ended up happening, which was admiring that he had the guts to stand up for the fact that on top of how many times he had returned wanting this job.
Sure.
He liked that. He liked that grit.
Yeah.
Gave him a job.
Persistence.
So what ends up happening was he gives him a job. My great-grandfather was illiterate, so he saw to it that he learned how to read and write.
Excellent.
He saw to it that he learned how to graze cattle, break horses.
Nice.
Ends up being with this man for about 4 decades or close to it.
Wow.
And as a result, when this rancher finally passes away, he wills a piece of land to my great-grandfather.
Wow.
This white man. Right?
Yeah.
So out of love and respect for him, he names my grandfather Sledge. Who becomes Sledge Senior. Love the name, right? Interesting thing about that is when he had his son, my dad,
Sure.
Sledge Jr., my dad hated the name because he got teased a lot, called Sludge and Sledgehammer and
Gotcha.
Sledgehead and all these other things, got into fights
Yep.
in school.
Yep.
But when he got married
cool.
and, prayed to God to have a son, as his firstborn.
Sure.
And I came along. He had actually sworn that he would never name his son Sledge, but elated and overjoyed to have a son with his wish, he named me Sledge. And you mentioned the uniqueness of the name and how it's done well for me. It really has, because people never forget it.
Yeah.
People always ask me, just like you did, how'd you get that name?
Fantastic.
So I always get to tell that story. People never forget it. And that's another form of catching the moment.
That tees me up fantastic, man, because number one, that's a fantastic story. Legend and legacy goes together, right? And
Sure
I think that whether there's, call it, like I said, if we call it a legend, there's a sense of mystery to it, right? So number one, that's actually what makes it such a dynamic story. So I'm going to hold it as truth, but now it's evolved into a true reality. So talk to me now, because obviously you've been at the intersection of creatives, artists, business development, obviously as a consultant. What at this stage of your life, your career, and even your experience has been your defining moment? And I know we've had some prequel talk about places of impact and intersection, but what is your defining moment up to this point that has brought you that kind of satisfaction?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would have to say something we also talked about over dinner, which is the value of relationships and the wonderful people that have come into my life, which is like a perpetual moment.
Sure.
Right? Because you remember where you meet certain people.
Sure.
You know why those people are important to you. And you invest and cultivate and you nurture the value of what that relationship can become over time. And then as you're taking that journey over time, those become moments of themselves, right? So us having dinner, us sitting in your car, those are all moments. Our very first conversation on the phone, those were moments. We've got a very special person that represents a relationship that we share.
Definitely.
A guy named Jason Atienza that we
Yes.
have in common. We had a moment there because we were both at an event that he was holding
Correct.
at Madison Square Garden. And, I think as a silver thread, when we talk about relationships being the moment for me that I realized that I had this opportunity to take the privilege that I was given to use that to help other people as a giver to begin with, as part of my living experience.
Yep.
Being able to marry my desire to do that and find a professional way to do it that was creative, that was entrepreneurial, that was, as I described to you, the business side of creative industry.
Yeah.
Were always opportunities that were put in front of me to be dynamic in that way. And when I get an opportunity to share knowledge or to connect people together or to make a new relationship where a door opens for me, let alone my ability to open it for someone else.
Sure.
Those become moments too.
Excellent.
That you always remember, that become part of your narrative. And I once had a mentor, my last boss, in fact, his name is Taylor Noguera.
Big shout, big shout.
And what was interesting about Taylor, a Harvard MBA, man of color himself, a Latino.
Excellent.
And he once said to me over breakfast, as a career management philosophy, you always at the end of the year want to look back on the past year like it's a book. And because your career ought to have a narrative where each new year you're adding a new chapter. So you always want to be looking at how you're changing your narrative from year to year. And it really resonated with me. I never forgot that. So I'm always looking for opportunities to look back on the year past.
Sure.
And ask myself, what did I accomplish? How did I help people? What were the things that I did that were useful to me that I can take into the next year? And what is it that I'm going to do new that represents this new chapter to add to my narrative?
Ooh, Sledge, you guys dropping these dimes, my dimes. So this is so powerful because obviously I think we're beginning to realize there's so many forums and so many interesting conversations that are happening that are really helpful.
Right.
Now, I'm 43, you're a little older than myself, but we're at this place where you've seen now the evolution. I talked about, New York City back in the day. We talked about this key word that is buzzing in our society today, but you probably maybe being at the forefront of it in its inclusion, right? Like, I think it's a needed and healthy conversation, but there's also an entitlement and a barrage when it comes to initiatives of inclusion that's maybe less authentic to where you were 15 years ago in this space. What is your perspective on it, and how kind of being a pioneer in this space, especially in the creative space, is there value? Because it's kind of like the social justice, right? Social justice was something that was needed, but now it became a very inauthentic expression of corporate America, right? Everybody's got an initiative for the sake of profiting off it. Do you see it the same way to some extent in the inclusion space? Being the fact that I can look at your background and see that this is something was a passion before it was an initiative.
You and I talked a lot about purpose and having a North Star.
Nice.
And when we first connected to sit down and have dinner this evening, one of the things we talked about is your relationships with people aren't defined by gender or color or creed.
Yes.
They're defined by becoming your people because of what you share and have in common, in particular where your values are concerned.
Sure.
So I think it's important that, look, we know what the definition is when we talk about diversity and equity and inclusion. Equity is about fairness. Mm-hmm. Inclusivity is about fairness for everyone. So I make that my North Star.
Nice.
And I'm focused on what I can do. And those are matters of character. You know what I mean? It's got nothing to do with one's education or height or where you went to school. Excellent. It's about your character. How much do I want to treat someone the way I want to be treated? That's not difficult.
Good old golden rule, right?
You know what I mean? And for whatever the reasons in society,
sure.
We have a lot of people who they only care about the uno, number one. And we've seen in society, for what we've been through over the last 3 years coming out of a pandemic.
Sure.
What happens when you don't have the help of others and the importance of pulling together. Now, we also saw how much we're pulled apart by the fact that, we went through what we went through.
That's correct.
But we also had a great deal of tragedy that pulled people together. And look, I got my share of calls based on, the murder of George Floyd.
That's correct.
Asking me everything from the disingenuous, proverbial, what should I be reading? And you go figure that out. If you don't know, you know what I mean? That's not what I'm here for.
Yep.
So people coming to me and saying, listen, I was shook by what I saw. I took a look in the mirror. I want to do the work, or I am doing the work.
Sure.
But I'm not credible while I'm going through what I'm going through for the things that I want to do that represents change.
Sure.
I need help. Will you help me? Which is an entirely different conversation.
That's fantastic.
You know what I mean? So when you think about, corporations that were putting up, their black boxes on Instagram,
yep.
putting out their statements,
sure,
but they're nowhere to be found now.
Yeah,
look, we knew that was coming once there was a fade
Correct.
Of the intensity of what people couldn't turn away from because you locked up at home.
Sure,
but I had the privilege of moments to catch in which people who came to me that were serious became new professional relationships where I got to build a personal relationship with those individuals as a result.
Excellent.
Against the backdrop of what those professional opportunities are. One of them is, my relationship with Jay. You know what I mean? Who I know we're going to talk about in a little while.
Yeah, man.
But that's it. Always staying conscious. I made the comment to you about, because of the position that you played, at the highest echelon of the NFL in team sports,
good times.
that as a skill player, as a wide receiver, It's about spacing. It's about positioning. It's
Nice.
about self-awareness of how you get clear to make a catch like you did.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So I always take into account what is happening at this moment of time that I'm getting to meet that person now.
Yeah.
And how do I not waste that? I always ask myself that. And
That's
I'm
so
fortunate
good.
to have had a lived experience where I have that awareness to have been taught the importance of it and take it to heart, because you can be taught something that you don't take to heart and, never learn it.
Yeah, you don't value it.
But, you know, I've had, you know, those moments, just like I'm getting to sit here right now.
Yeah.
That's not an accident. It's a great privilege, and knowing it as such, not wasting it, because now we have a relationship. You know what I'm saying?
Fantastic, Sled. Like this, it's so refreshing to hear it, because these are the themes, understanding the value in people. And I tell people, your values determine your value, right?
Exactly.
I mean, like literally the things that you value determine the places that will be the most fruitful in your life.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what it is. You know, like, my marriage is dynamic because I really value it. And it flourishes in that way.
And
so,
well, you should, because she's amazing.
hey man, can't she fine, girl?
Wow.
Hey man, I'm with you. So, before I get to Jay, I want to talk about just some. You talked about where your family came from. Talk to me a little bit about just the progression of a family dynamic and a narrative coming out of poverty, and the sense of gratitude. How has that worked? But also growing up in the mecca of opportunity, right? Even if there's different opportunity, whether it's for race, gender, class, etc. But you're still here in New York City, where everybody knows and believes that we can make something happen. So talk to me about the mentality, the opportunity, and how you emerged through that, kind of through your childhood and education on to becoming an executive and a business owner.
Well, I mean, we're both, Black men.
Yeah.
And, we know the importance of what you're influenced by other men.
Sure.
Right? And so I was very fortunate to grow up in a household where I had a fatherly presence that was positive.
Excellent.
Right? And he was someone who never complained. I watched him get up every morning, go to work. So work ethic was important to him. Teaching the lessons that he was learning in the world, particularly as a Black man working in a white-collar environment. And that wasn't prevalent.
What kind of work did he do?
Well, he worked for what was back then, I think, the big 6 accounting agencies, which are now the big 3, if I'm correct.
I got you.
But he was there at the dawn of the birth of the management consulting business.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And the management consulting business used to be in-house, and accounting firms of that scale who offered that as a form of service under the umbrella of those accounting firms. Right? So he worked for that capacity, where he wasn't a management consulting himself, but he was on staff for the management consultants that were rainmakers.
Sure.
And he had a relationship with a boss who was a teacher. So as a result of working for this person, sharing these important examples and opportunities to give him institutional knowledge.
Nice.
I was getting those lessons at home. I was getting that.
Man, that's so powerful.
At the dinner table.
That's excellent.
And that, as a result, made me conscious of business. Wasn't the hustler on the street.
Yeah.
It wasn't even necessarily as much as, wide-eyed as I was of celebrities and athletes too.
Yeah.
But I was intrigued with having, first and foremost, a positive role model and a father.
And you received.
And then these storytellings that he would bring home about lessons that he learned at work that were listened by me, and growing up became something of, every kid, when they're asked when they're young, what do you want to be when you grow up? And they may say rocket scientist or race car driver or whatever it is.
Sure.
I wanted to be a business person because my dad was a business person.
It's fantastic.
And then when I was about 15, one of the things that my dad did to sacrifice for us is he understood the importance of education. So he he sent us our formative years. My sister and I went to private schools.
Well,
You know? So I was also getting that diversity of exposure from that experience.
Excellent.
And then at the age of 15, I got exposed to someone who was an entrepreneur. I'd never heard the word before, right? So that person became a mentor to me at that young age, where most people don't get mentors until much later in
you
life.
were
And
built for this.
I'm getting that as
Sledge Machine was formed.
as a young black man.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, all those things, when you talk about a lived experience that you're shaped by, represent these different moments, represent these different chapters of a narrative that I didn't know that I had yet, that would influence me much later in life to want to do the things that I'm doing now.
Excellent. This now it's beginning to add up, and have some similar things, but almost with the missed opportunity. I feel like my dad is my superhero. Yet we grew up in a divorced home, so he wasn't present, and that just kind of amazing. Would say all the things necessary in our time spent, but just the lack of presence created an open crack for some of those negative influences that I was enticed by as a young man. And it talks about the value. I think it's important for us to recognize the value of a father, of a sound example, and to some extent just a healthy home, especially for young men.
For any young man.
Yes.
Any young man. I don't care what your walk of life is.
Yep.
You know
Well
what
said.
I mean?
Well said.
But in particular for us, because there's the stereotype of us lacking it.
Yes.
And I wasn't that. You know
Listen,
what I mean? And
well
it made me
said.
that much more conscious of why this stereotype is BS.
Well,
you know what I mean? But also does damage when there's no presence that's positive for you to teach you these things.
There you go. And I think, like I said, we're in a, we have massive fractures in our society, massive fractures in the home for all kinds of different reasons, but it doesn't change the optimal. It doesn't change what's necessary, what's vital for all of us. That's so profound. Want to take your sports betting game to the next level? Look no further than our sponsor, betting.us. With a user-friendly interface, unbeatable odds, and up-to-the-minute insights, betting.us is the ultimate sports betting destination. Visit betting.us today and start winning big. I think our common relationship is Jason Atianza, one of the most dopest creatives, design artists. But obviously he worked through the creative. I know he was in advertising.
Yes.
So I'm imagining that's probably how you guys connected. And you talked about this thread, and I think everybody needs to take away this thread of dynamic relationships, how to cultivate them, not peg them, but nourish them. As I'm listening to you, Sledge, you're talking about, the ability to grab hold of something value, but not predetermine where it goes. Just value it and allow it to take shape in a way where it's possibly transformative.
That's right.
How has that been for you and Jason? And what do you see? Like, I got my story, but talk about that relationship, because it's led us here today just to share your amazing story.
Well, as they say, Jason is a brother from another mother.
There you go.
And I talked about my journey through being entrepreneurial. My second startup was a TV advertising production company called Brown Bag. Had 3 other partners, all of us black men.
Nice.
This was the early aughts, 2003, 2004.
Sure.
And our mix of people included Charles Stone, who is a prominent filmmaker. Charles, for example, was the mind behind the Budweiser Wassup campaign. If you're
Wassup!
Exactly.
That is
another partner is a fantastic creative named Maurice Marable.
Nice.
Maurice was at HBO as a creative director in charge of their, or one of the people responsible for the creative direction of their on-air promotion group. And now he's a very prominent episodic television director.
Nice.
So shows like Veep and things like that. You can be watching it, and if you ever see the name directed by Maurice Marable, that's him.
Might go take a look.
So we had this company, and what we needed to do was strike as a business model a strategic partnership in which we could get financed.
Sure.
So I was part of this team and responsible for helping us scout who that could be. Excellent. Where the money was concerned.
Got to get the bread.
So that really became my first taste without knowing it yet. What I've described to you as the business side of creative industry.
Excellent.
Because that's what we were doing. We were monetizing the creative of, the making of this content.
Sure.
On behalf of, becoming vendors to advertising agencies that outsource their business for making television commercials called spots in that lingo at that mix. So part of what we were doing is we had to get ourselves out there to get our name out there.
Excellent.
We were looking for these relationships.
Sure.
And because there was interest in what we were doing because of the cachet of the two partners that I described to you.
Sure.
I got to go to all these really cool parties.
Of course.
There was this cat that I kept seeing at this party. Right? Really cool looking cat. This certain Filipino cat. And after a couple of times, there was this familiarity between us where we didn't talk.
Yeah.
But we do the
nod going?
The head nod.
Yeah.
The head kick. So the better the parties got, the more I noticed that this cat was at these same parties. And I was like, I've got nothing on him. And then one time we gave each other a look where it's like, it is not enough for us to give each other another head nod.
Yeah.
Talk. And, we had a conversation, and I don't recall, interesting enough, I remember that we had the conversation, but I couldn't tell you what the conversation was about.
Yep.
All I walked away with is that is one of the coolest cats I've ever met, and I want to know him better.
You know why, right?
Tell me, what's your take?
He's from Jersey.
Is that it?
Yeah. I think it is. No. Go ahead, bro.
So what ended up happening was that is now north of 18 years ago.
Amazing.
That I've known him all this time. Jason, of course, long story short, is the reason we met.
Yeah, no doubt.
And the story there is I had listened to the episode where he was your guest.
Sure. And
I had noticed that at that time you didn't have any sponsors.
None.
So I said to Jason, this is David Tyree. He's launched this Catch the Moment, and he's got no sponsors. How is that possible? And Jason was like, I don't know. Why don't I introduce you guys and you can ask them? And that's how that all came about. That's how we had that fantastic conversation when you and I hit it off the way that we did.
I just love it, man, because 18 years, like not many people can say that about any relationships. So to have the awareness and just like I said, just that open air of care and connection, it's really valuable and it serves you throughout the course of your life. And like I said, we're bearing fruit here today talking about what are you most excited about, where you were pre-COVID, navigating through the muddy waters where we all did. And as you're looking back on 2022, going ahead with the Sledge machine.
Life is not only short, but fragile. I mentioned my dad and the positive influence in my life. My dad, I was telling you, he's just turned 90.
That's so real.
That's a long life. And
that's a long life.
Yeah, and we talk about the importance of relationships. So one of the ways you show, besides saying that it's important as an affirmation, is how long have you had the relationships that are important to you? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'm fortunate to have a lot of relationships that I've had even longer than my relationship with Jay.
Yeah.
Right? But I look for that. I look for learning about people in their narrative.
Sure.
When they talk about relationships that they've had, how long they've had those relationships.
Sure.
Or are they always falling out with people, in terms of
leapfrog mentality, fallouts. Yeah.
And when I think about pre-COVID, zeroing in on life being short, that I knew as a thought.
Sure.
But I'd never thought about that not only it's short, it's fragile. Because when your time is up, you don't know when that's going to be. Ooh. And the time came up for a lot of people who caught this thing where we did not know what was happening.
Didn't know what was going on.
We got locked down. And, we went from where we are now,
sure.
Speaking of thank God, to you went in the hospital, you weren't coming out.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so, being entrepreneurial, and you are too with this Catch the Moment, and of course the umbrella of that a company that is DT3.
No doubt.
You know what hard is.
I do.
You also know what hard is in terms of what is the transferable skill set and intangibles because of what it takes to become a professional athlete.
Truly.
And get drafted and become a starter and do the things that you did for 7 years.
Sure.
So when I think about pre-COVID, I think about the fact that time is important.
Yep.
But that didn't always equate with me not wasting time. You know what I mean? And I had less of a premium that I placed on the importance of that. But then when we were locked up,
sure,
time became so important because two things happened. Number one, you were spending time with the most important relationship you're ever going to have, which is yourself.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then number two, you start asking yourself these questions. Well, how much time do I have?
Sure.
Because you don't know. It's going to be up when it's going to be up, and there's nothing you can do about that.
Yeah.
So at the very least, we talked about, again, you being a wide receiver and the importance of spacing and self-awareness about that.
Correct.
What am I going to do if I'm one of the people that gets through this?
Sure.
You know what I mean? So when we came through the other side of it, it became about the importance of not wasting it.
Well said.
But you have to be a work in progress on that.
Yeah.
Because there are things where, I'm encouraging a founder who is taking the biggest, riskiest, most important thing that they're going to do and then giving me the privilege to help them figure things out.
Sure.
How they're going to build something of importance to them for their vision.
Yep.
But then also encouraging them and helping them overcoming fears. But then I got fears of my own to face as an individual to be authentic about that.
Absolutely.
In terms of practicing what you preach. So that's what I'm doing now with my time that no one else sees. What am I reading? What are the podcasts besides, of course, Catch the Moment?
Appreciate the love.
And figuring out how do I work on myself in these areas of my life where it scares me.
Man, appreciate you sharing that.
You talk a lot about, your relationship with God. And I believe that there is something much bigger than us.
Oh,
you know what I mean? Because there are people that are no longer here and there are people that are.
That are.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What determined that?
These are some of the questions that, and guess what? There's enough things that I've settled in life to feel confident in sharing. And then there's some things that I just haven't. And I'm confident about God. I'm confident about Christ. I'm confident about what that storyline is. But there's still every now and then these gaps that we should always consider. And I think that's kind of what leads me to my confidence. I'm like, I have to trust in something that is more secure than my own human experience.
That's right.
The fragility of who I am. With my best effort, I still find myself greatly blemished. My wife can remind me of that.
Right. And we all got them.
And we all
have them.
But being secure, right?
Right.
And I think that's the road that, if we would all be honest, that we kind of could either torment us in some way. And I think the desire is to remove the torment in our experience, remove the fear and the paralysis that can come by analysis. So, and that takes people. That takes people and the true essence of trust in a power that is clearly higher than us.
You talk about sharing. One of the things that I'll share is I am reading the Bible cover to cover.
Really?
Because I want to know what's in it. You know what I mean?
Now, is this your first time?
No, but I've skipped through the Bible.
Okay, I got you.
As opposed to reading. What does it say?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And one of the things that is really important about it is a relationship with God is about trusting him because he's responsible for all of this.
All of it.
You know what I mean?
The whole thing.
You may not believe in him per se, but okay, what do you believe? Because, we had, that moment, speaking of, you playing football.
Sure.
Where Hamlin collapsed.
Yeah.
And on Twitter, I'd never seen more people, whether they're religious or not, talk about the importance of prayer, right? And when I've had challenges with my dad's health, talking about, pray. Prayer works.
Yeah.
Sure does.
It sure does.
And so, when you read that book, number one, particularly in the Old Testament, the stories are so epic, it's just, I don't know what to say about it. But also what's really, really interesting is each of those figures figuring out how they're going to trust and believe to develop faith in their individual relationship with God.
To
That's
maintain.
that's the thread that goes throughout it.
Well
right?
said.
And one of the things that I've learned to do, to think about consciously each morning, every day, is thank God that I got up. You know what I mean?
Some basics.
Thank Him for what I have, just the
Yes.
basic things.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And to remember, man, love Him, love others, and love myself.
That's
Right?
excellent.
So when you talk about, being secure, you're talking about the acceptance, which
Sure.
includes your faults.
Yes.
But then also when you talk about other people and ask me what I do professionally and what I've shared about that, look, I do everything from that professionally to when my neighbor is away, she knows that she can text me and say, hey, I'm going to be this long. I have a key to her place, and I'm going to water her plants.
Excellent.
You know what I'm saying?
Excellent.
So all those things represent that it's not about you. You're only here for the split second in time. What happens when you're not here anymore? You know what I mean? Ask yourself those questions. So those are things that I thought about while we were stuck at home.
Heck yeah.
You know? And, it made it very important to me to think about, how did I get here? What is my purpose?
Yes.
What should I be doing with this free choice and free
Yes.
will for somebody who gifted what's been gifted to me?
Well said. You said free, and I think that's what makes what I call the true and living God separate is, although He's actively engaged in the experience, He liberates man to make their own decisions.
Right.
And I think that's where, if we're honest as humans, and there's, like I said, there's some difficult things where I have to resolve to trust God with the things that call it His sovereignty covers. Meaning man, I guess you're just bigger than me. And even though I'm reading this and this is what you say, I'll give you one example. Someone who was dear to us, and he kind of like new in our community, our faith community. They come in, they lose their 9-month-old daughter, probably within the first 8 months. What are we saying? Outside of God is worthy of your trust, and train wrecked it just train wrecked everybody. And we were fortunate to watch this man and his wife maintain the course, maintain the faith without accusation. And everything in the human experience, I could understand it if they did, even though God isn't worthy of our blame. And I was like, man, but it takes a resolute and a resolve and a belief beyond something in our experience that just kind of isn't lining up. Why, right? We have the why questions. So the existential conversation is one of the most dynamic, where if we're just honest, man, like we're missing something. It's like there's something we're missing, namely, I believe God Himself, but ultimately it's the balm that we're all looking for, the peace and the purpose. Right. And it's so great to hear you just on that journey. I want to ask you one thing, because you offer so much, and I can look at some of the places that you've had success stories and a part in, because we don't often give. It's kind of like we talked about the first rounders and the all pros. Right. They get the respective credit that they deserve, because you can't win a team without studs. Right. But the strength of a championship team is with the meat of the roster. Right. The guys who are the third rounders is kind of like first, second rounders, get all the recognition. Fourth down, those are some guys that you hope work out.
What round were you drafted in?
6. Okay. I was fortunate to be drafted. I wasn't even on the radar, trust me. Okay. I came from no one even knew who I was to I was just hoping to get invited.
Syracuse had a squad in your day, though.
You know what? Yeah. We had the first losing season my senior year in 17 years. Okay. So we had enough talent for sure. Me and Dwight Freeney came in the same class. He got drafted the year before me because he didn't get redshirted. Mm-hmm. But trust me, man, it was deflating that being my captain. I was the captain there, first losing season in 17 years. So yeah, we had the glory days, but it was sadly the beginning of a little bit of the decline. Right. There was no Donovan McNabb to pass the torch to once he left. So, one thing I really wanted to ask you is okay, now that the sledge machine stays moving, it's very clear that you're probably one of the more profound producers behind the scenes in a particular work. But what would you say is your proudest accomplishment as you've served those entities, you know, your own business or even an individual? What is your proudest accomplishment as you've arrived to this stage?
I got to think about that. I don't know that I've hit that yet, but I think when I earn the trust of anyone,
nice,
where you can see in their eyes, particularly when they make a mistake, particularly when they are dealing with a setback, that they trust you because you're not going to pass judgment. Right?
Excellent.
What is it that I'm doing consistently? You used the word tonight, you know, authentic over dinner.
Nice.
Right? People have to believe that you have their best interests at heart. And I think for founders of startups, what they go through is so incredibly every minute of every day hard. Mm-hmm. That in particular, when you're talking about a person of color,
sure,
when you're talking about a woman,
yes,
they deal with that without deciding that they're going to start their own enterprise. But quite often they start their own enterprise because they're being kept out.
That's right.
By systemic barriers.
Excellent.
So, you know, one of the things that we also had talked about over dinner is, you know, your wife had asked me about what's the distinction between someone in terms of what I considered an important skill set to teach.
Sure.
And I had described the importance of critical thinking.
Excellent.
That I'm not telling people what to do. I'm helping them understand what their options are and then thinking through how to decide what is the solution to one barrier versus another and the next. Because there's going to be one barrier versus another.
Yes.
And the next one and the next one and the next one to overcome.
Strategic thinking, foresight, you know, kind of seeing the field and understanding what our options are.
Right.
And maybe how to mitigate some of the preceding, you know, threats.
Right. So Layla was asking me, well, how do you do that? Because what's the distinction between somebody that can learn that,
sure, versus
somebody who cannot?
Can't.
And so I was describing these different variations of people, right? Right? And if you recall that.
Yep,
there
I
are
do.
some people who don't want to learn.
Yep.
You know what I mean? There are.
Don't be that, y'all. Don't be that.
There are people who are sponges. They want to be not a know-it-all. They want to be a learn-it-all.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Which is what I'm built like.
Sure.
I want to constantly be learning and
Excellent.
growing. You know, as that old saying goes, you're either growing or you're dying. There's no in between.
That's right. Growth mindset.
So, but because of the challenges of setbacks and the investment of time as the most precious commodity that we have that we cannot get back when we waste it, speaking of wasting it, to earn someone's trust.
Excellent.
So that they know that they can come to me when things are at their worst.
Yeah.
Because they know they can come to me when things are at their worst. And it's not going to be, I told you so, or criticism.
Excellent.
It's going to be about rolling up the sleeves and figuring out how we're going to address this, how we're going to get it done. You know what I mean? That's my proudest moment. My consistency of authenticity to be that for who I get the privilege of working with, David, because it is a privilege. Anybody who's willing to trust me with their baby, you know what I mean? Get to wherever it can ultimately go.
Yep.
You know, that's a privilege.
I love that.
It's not mine. I'm not the one who started it.
I'm
not the one taking the biggest risk that there is.
Sure.
They are. You know what I mean? So making a contribution and where that contribution can be the difference between success and failure, that's a big deal to me.
Man, this has been so good. So I have one question to kind of roll this out. Your life bleeds tremendous authenticity, the value of people, and, you know, the gratitude of privilege and opportunity, right? So there's a lot of sobriety in what we're hearing here. You know, try to find me, you know, one of the two most impactful people that has shaped Sledge. Because when we talk about, I have a saying that nothing great will ever be accomplished by one individual. Nothing great. So who are maybe one or two of the people that you think have impacted your life in such a way that you feel that sense of of being indebted to?
Well, the first is, as I described, my father. You know,
tremendous.
He just set such a positive example of how to behave as a man.
Fantastic.
The second is the first mentor I ever had. His name was Bill Foster. He's no longer living. But he never, ever, ever was too busy for me, right?
Amazing.
And
making time.
I'd never seen anyone that successful before. I'll be blunt. You could smell the money on this man.
You can smell that New York City success.
And the fact that he was self-made, it wasn't something that was given to him.
Sure.
He was from Texas, so we had that in common because of my family.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And I'm going to San Antonio next week to see my son graduate from boot camp. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
And he was a dapper dude. It gave me an
appreciation. He was clean. He was crispy.
He was real clean. He was like, Jimmy GQ clean. Ooh. You know what I mean? And it taught me that caliber of success, not just success as trappings, an accumulation of things, but how to carry yourself having achieved it.
The substance of the person.
How to behave when you have that, because you have that.
Yeah.
And not just what it is, you'd kill your mother for $1.
There you go.
That's not what this person was.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And he set that example.
So there was integrity.
Me, which again was about character and integrity and emotional intelligence. And I'm serious, man. The guy never denied me a moment.
It's amazing.
I cannot tell you how many times I called him for advice,
or
an introduction that he would always make. And don't get me wrong, there were other people who are more prominent than him who did and have done the same thing.
Sure.
But he was the first.
Impactful.
And he was the one that I learned the term and the definition of what an entrepreneur was. And I'm just so grateful that I had someone like that to take me under their wing in their life, because not everybody gets that, and certainly not every young black man growing up gets that.
This has been amazing. I hope that every listener, we can wind down. Every listener really has taken the gems from your example. Your keen sense of awareness, self-awareness, EQ space helps me to understand why the pistons are churning in the sledge machine. Like your life, your authenticity. And obviously conversations is open, but I just knew we had to have this dialogue so that people can recognize that it's this kind of thought process that will yield you and bring you to your next moment of success. And I think success is relative as well as a moving target too. So I always want to, define hey, we're after that moment of fulfillment, not just success monetarily, not just success positionally, not just success. So some of
the most miserable people I know are some of the richest.
Oh gosh. Miserable.
I mean, it's
I met
wild.
a few, dog.
Yeah.
And I'm like, listen, man, just give me your ducats. I'll teach you how to be content. It never really works out that way. But Sledge, man, thank you for being who you are. We look forward to continue to build with you. Where can we find and how can people find you so that they can hopefully access and tap into some of your wisdom?
Well, I'm at Sledge Machine on Twitter, although I'm not on Twitter a great deal. Mm-hmm. The website is sledgemachine.com.
Nice.
Should make clear that the spelling of Sledge Machine, one word, is SLG machine. Very hip now to drop vowels from your name in the creative world is something that I do as well.
Nice.
But I'm not hard to find. I'm a big power user of LinkedIn, and that's probably the most easiest place to access me via DM.
We're going to look out for more here. I want to thank everybody for checking in with us.